Good evening. Today is Monday, April 14th, 2025. It's 5:30 p.m. Next up on deck is the city update and lobbyist update, Brian McCain.
Thank you, sir. Just a quick update on the PUC just transition solicitation. This will be Thursday, April 17th at Hogue Recital Hall at CSU Pueblo from 4 to 6 p.m. In advance of the planned 2031 closure of Xcel Energy's Comanche plant, Unit 3, the PUC will hold public hearing to listen to community members' comments about what would provide a just transition for Pueblo. The hearing is part of the state's decision-making process that will decide what Xcel Energy will use to replace approximately 750 megawatt power plant that provides jobs to local employees, provides more than 30 million in annual taxes to local government, and has an economic impact of almost 200 million yearly. They will have light refreshments and there's a children's play area available. So if you need to bring the kids, bring them. And I encourage everybody from the community to show up and voice their opinion on this. Current boards and commissions, openings and vacancies. The ADA Advisory Committee has 2 vacancies. Term is August 30th, 23 to August 20th, 27. The Community Services Advisory Commission, CSAC, has 1 vacancy. Term goes from April 2023 to April 2027. The Urban Renewal Authority of the City of Pueblo, or PURA, has 1 vacancy, and it's a term February 1st, 2025 to February 1st, 2030. And the application on that one closes this Wednesday at 8 a.m. The Pueblo Commission on Energy has 10 vacancies for a 4-year term. The deadline to apply is April 28th at 8 a.m. for that one. To apply for one of these boards or commissions, just visit pueblo.us and visit the boards and commissions. You can click on the apply for boards and commissions or view current boards and commission openings. If you have any question, call the mayor's office at 719-553-2655. Pueblo Memorial Airport flight tour event. Pueblo Memorial Airport and Denver Air Connection, our new airline that's coming out from the EAS service, are excited to announce the new Essential Air Service partnership with 12 weekly round-trip flights from Pueblo to Denver beginning May 1st. You're invited to the flight preview event this Wednesday, April 16th at 10:30 a.m. at the Pueblo Memorial Airport to get to know our new air provider. The Denver Air Connection staff will be available for questions, and the ERJ 145 will be on hand for tours. So that's the jet that they're going to go back and forth from Pueblo to Denver. And then some good news, finally, our 3rd police officer returned home Saturday, and all 3 officers that were injured in the shooting were recognized at the honor escort and welcome home that day. It was well attended by the community, and it was good to see them all 3 come home. And with that, unless you have any questions, I'll turn it over to the Romeros for the legislative update.
Thank you, Brian. Chair Gomez, members of City Council, Mayor Graham, thank you for the time. Just wanted to bring you up to speed on where we're at with the legislative session. We're in the 97th day of that session, 23 days left to go in this session. A lot of bills still to be debated and some bills still being introduced. Quickly on the state budget, we followed several things that impacted Pueblo, including school finance. Obviously, we were concerned about, as you know, the $1.2 billion shortfall that the state was facing was going to impact schools. And one of the decisions they were contemplating was eliminating averaging, which hurts schools with enrollments that are declining. We fought that particular item. Real victory for schools this year that in this School Finance Act and in the budget that the schools are fully funded. As well as the schools, we also were really concerned about some cuts to the Institute of Mental Health in Pueblo, also known as the State Hospital, where a number of employees work, a number of shortages in some of those areas, and we made sure and advocated that those positions be fully funded on the campus of the Institute of Mental Health. As well, funding around public health for the city of Pueblo and public safety, mainly around the Department of Local Affairs, where there were some grant programs that get funding that provide funding to the city of Pueblo. There were potential cuts there, and we fought against those, and those cuts were not taken. So, in light of or in spite of the fact that there was a significant shortfall, we did everything we could to minimize the impact on Pueblo. As far as legislation, obviously the big concern for us and for the city of Pueblo were a number of bills that impact and significantly infringed upon home rule. Senate Bill 62, which was the failure to appear for charges in municipal court, was sent to the governor on April 7th. The vote on that bill was in the Senate was 22 yeses and 11 noes and 2 excused. In the House, there were 40 yeses, 21 noes, and 4 excused. Basically, a party line vote for for that bill, Senate Bill 62. It was sent to the governor on April 7th, and the governor has 3 more days to determine whether or not he's going to veto that bill. And we have been putting as much pressure as we possibly can. This bill was the more challenging of the bills because the governor didn't like the bill, but he didn't have any of his departments testify and essentially didn't take a position on 62 other than to say that he didn't like it. But there's a lot of pressure from the chiefs of police and other municipalities, including Pueblo and Aurora and other communities. They're asking the governor to veto this bill. Regarding House Bill 1147, the fairness and transparency in municipal court, we are waiting for the House to concur with Senate amendments before this is sent to the governor. It's been on the calendar for several days. We're not sure why the House hasn't taken it up, other than they have a pretty robust calendar and a lot of bills on the calendar to debate. But we think that they'll probably vote on the Senate amendments and send that to the governor, and then that clock will tick in terms of 10 days for the governor to either sign the bill or veto. There, we're having a little bit more traction in terms of that bill being vetoed because there are so many other entities are opposed to that bill, including the chiefs of police. Many more municipalities are opposed to that bill. So we hope that we can convince the governor to veto that. Just wanted you to know that the city of Pueblo submitted letters on these bills, and we hand carried those to the governor's office last week. The one bill that we were supporting, which was the Colorado Municipal League's Municipal Court Bill 1276, was killed last week. Again, I think there was a concerted effort to make sure that the only 3 bills that went forward were the bills that were supported early on, and this bill died on a party line vote. Finally, because I know you have a busy schedule, and we're going to send you a complete report with much more detail, is I wanted to put on your radar screen Senate Bill 276, which was introduced not too many days ago. And this bill extends strict privacy protections for immigration-related personal information to local governments, including cities and counties and other state branches. Local agencies must maintain detailed records of all information requests and submit quarterly reports to state offices. The bill prohibits unauthorized disclosure of such information and restricts cooperation with federal immigration authorities, specifically local public institutions like schools, childcare centers, education providers, and healthcare facilities are barred from sharing personal data or permitting federal access to non-public areas without a court order, warrant, or explicit consent. And I will say it as an aside, there will be a lot of challenges to this particular bill, but there's also some implications for the city without any funding that may go along with this in terms of added burdens to the city. So we'll continue to watch that bill as it moves forward, and we'll send you much more detail on the full implications of Senate Bill 276. And with that, we'll take any questions that you have, members of City Council and the Mayor's office.
Council Flores. You have something? Oh, no. Anybody else? Comments, questions? I think we're good, Gil.
All right, thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Excuse me. Next up is the City Wellness Clinic. Heather Graham, Mayor; Bella Trujillo, Assistant Director, HR; Hub International Representative. And it's a 15-minute presentation. Welcome, guys. Good evening.
All right, I think everybody can hear okay. Well, thanks for having us down. My name is Danny Talley. I'm with Hub International. I've been the lead consultant with the City of Pueblo for about the last 17 years. And Sean Seahawk is with me here, and we're going to go through tonight a little bit on the on-site clinic. A few years ago, we moved the city to a self-funded medical insurance program, which has been working fantastically, and building a reserve. And so the next logical step is to try to get a on-site clinic. We've been working with HR team and the mayor and going through exploration and what this would look like. So Sean has put together a PowerPoint this evening to kind of walk through this on what an on-site clinic is and why it makes sense to move that way, to get everybody kind of on the same page and give you some information.
Thank you, Danny, and good evening. Thank you for allowing us to present to you. As Danny said, we'll be going through a bit of a project overview. So first, what is an on-site clinic and why would the city even want to consider that? On-site clinic is something the city would sponsor. All of their self-funded medical plan members would be eligible to come to the clinic for specified services. Most clinics work around the range of preventive care, ongoing care management, chronic care management, a little bit of occupational health or physical therapy might be offered in the clinic, depending again on how the city would like to have that set up. Some of the reasons, again, that you would like to consider this would be convenience. So for plan members, you're all individuals who see providers and you know that they don't have a lot of time. They're very, very busy. Sometimes you have to wait. And so getting access to a clinic where you can walk in and be seen takes less time away from your work. And so that can reduce presenteeism on the job or where they're having to take time during the work hours to go to the doctor. It also allows a deeper relationship with that provider. They work directly for the city, for your medical plan. They can develop deeper relationships where they can more actively manage chronic conditions and any other health conditions that might impact your program, thereby heading off future costs of care. It also keeps people from accessing maybe more readily urgent care or emergency rooms. And emergency rooms, as you know, is one of the most expensive places to get care. So if we can develop that good, strong relationship with that doctor, or you have access virtually as well as in person, we can head off care that is in more expensive locations outside in the market. And again, keeping people healthier impacts the plan, keeps costs down because healthier people don't have as much in claims. All right. So what does it take to be successful? Obviously, we need a provider that will connect directly with your employees and their spouses and children that are on the medical plan, developing that great relationship. We want to see some ROI, right, from people not going out into the market, having their care inside the clinic where it's that capitated fee. We aren't as subject to that rising healthcare prices in the market. And then a health-focused model is really important. We want to make sure that, again, people's care is managed, their chronic conditions are managed so that they are less impactful to our self-funded medical plan. There was a worksite health study released nationally, 231 survey participants that had on-site, near-site clinics. 30% of respondents believed that they had medical cost reductions because they had the on-site clinic. 90% believed that their objectives had at least somewhat been met. And so you can read the statistics here, but generally adding a clinic is seen as very positive, both for the members who have better access to care, but it can also save money in your health plan by directly taking that cost out of the market into the clinic, but also better managing and reducing those healthcare costs. Now, when we marketed, we did look at the direct utilization that you have had on your self-funded plan. Come in.
Somebody's calling the council. We don't know who it is.
All right, so we'll just go through the little bit. We looked at the population, and so when your clinic administrators that bid on this, they knew exactly the population that they were bidding on, so we didn't have any just generalized pricing. They knew the market, they knew the employee population, the employees, the spouses, the children that were covered by the plan. We looked at utilization. And I don't want to go through and bore you with all these details, but we looked at exact services that are being held, or that are being had through the medical plan. And all of those services that each of these clinic administrators felt comfortable could be administered within the clinic. And again, thereby reducing costs through the self-funded plan. When we looked at conditions that could be managed, again, chronic conditions, and then some of the medicine and procedures, we wanted to make sure that any clinic provider that was bidding on this program was well aware of the population and their health status. And so they were able to review all of this data. All right, so then what happened? So we went out to market. We told each of the vendors that the city was very interested in particularly the urgent care, primary care, very, very important in a clinic. Chronic condition management, also one of the primary goals of the clinic. We talked a little bit about physical therapy being offered in the clinic, and then occupational health. Maybe not the full spectrum, but at least to start, there's some very key occupational health services that can be managed well in a clinic, and we'll go through those in just a minute. So when we put that RFP out, we had a response from 5 clinic vendors, and you can see them summarized here. Crossover, Marathon, Nextera, Premise, and Proactive all have extensive experience in managing clinics across the country, have provided these services that the city had requested many, many times over. So the city had reviewed all of the proposals and factors, again, taken into consideration. Cost savings in redirecting all of that care, the urgent, the emergent, and the primary care into the clinic. Cost savings through filling common prescriptions. That's another service that clinics can provide. They can stock some of the most common prescriptions, generally generic, and can provide those at a very low cost. Cost savings by redirecting various labs into the clinic. So some easy lab work that can be done by the clinic as well. Cost savings redirecting some occupational health, including post-offer physicals and drug screenings, can be done in the clinic. And then cost savings through better management of chronic conditions and coaching participants to better health. So directing, as I said, all of this care into the clinic, those costs are managed at that capitated fee, and keeping that cost out of the market can provide cost savings for those services. Now, we do want to point out funding for the clinic would not come from the general fund. It would come from the benefits fund. Again, this is redirection of care that would already be paid for through the self-funded medical plan. And so the benefits fund would be funding this clinic. And I know I had worked with Bella earlier in the day. The reserve that's already in place is over $6 million. So we feel very confident that the reserve will fund the startup of the clinic. All right, so moving on from there, the city has gotten narrowed down to 2 finalists. They were able to travel to visit clinics managed by each of their 2 finalists. Actually, this is, so this is some occupational health data that we wanted to share. So these are the services in the occupational therapy, occupational health side that could also be redirected into the clinic. I apologize, I missed that page. All right, so now we're down to two finalist vendors, Crossover Health and Premise Health. The city team was able to travel to two of the clinics managed by these vendors and had a very positive experience with both. At this point, we have gone back to each of them and asked for their best and final pricing, and we are still waiting for that. So that is where we are at, and we wanted to just bring you this overview and answer any questions you might have.
Okay, Council Martinez.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation and how exciting about this opportunity. I do have a couple of questions. One, because the slides were a little fast. How
Yeah,
many,
sorry.
no, it's okay. I like it. How many employees and family members are we anticipating serving?
Hold, I didn't bring my glasses. I might have to have Danny tell me.
Here's, I guess, my true question.
Yeah.
Is the space on Ditmer large enough to accommodate all of the patients that we would be serving?
Yeah, so I believe the answer is about 1,800 patients with city employees and their spouses or family members that are seen. Is that right, Danny?
That's correct.
Okay, and so the reason why they're bringing this to you now, and it's played into a really long-range plan that they have been working on for several years now, the self-insurance part, as they had talked about. But what we would envision on the staff side is that we would use an existing floor at the Ditmer building because it's already a medical facility. So you would just need one floor. It's not a very large
Wow.
area. I went to Gwinnett County in Atlanta and visited, and they see about 6,000 patients. And it's 3 exam rooms. So it was about 3,200 square feet. It's a very small space. They have a small pharmacy. So it would be an existing space that the city already has with probably little renovation cost because it's already a medical facility.
So just one floor, Mayor?
Just one floor.
Okay.
Yeah, and one of the things that we see in the market, I think it's a quick side note, the average physician nationally sees about 2,500 to 3,000 patients they have in their book of business. And so one of the reasons that clinic is very desirable for a physician is because it's not just a numbers game any longer. They can actually now help manage care of a much reduced amount of people. So the numbers that we gave in the city kind of gives you a ballpark. It's almost half of what they would normally do on the outside market. So then gives them more time to spend with the employees and their family members.
Okay, great. So for Crossover Health and Premise Health, they are going to act as contractors. They're not necessarily going to be, like, we're not going to be hiring an MD
Correct.
as city employees.
Yes, that's exactly correct. You would hire a Crossover or Premise to manage the clinic, and the providers would be hired by that clinic vendor, not directly to the city.
Okay. And then I'm curious what an annual operating budget would look like for both. I know that we're kind of waiting on.
I think we have to follow up with that information. We did not bring cost information now. I know we're finalizing and we're getting down to that best and final pricing, but I don't have that memorized in my head, but we'll get that for you.
And I know, so 6 million, that's quite a reserve, and congratulations to the HR and, Hub for, getting us to this point. I'm curious what we're spending that on, right? Or in the past.
When you were fully insured, you were giving it to the carrier, right?
Okay.
That's how fully insured works. You give them your money and they provide the care and they don't give any back if you run better than expected. So now we're better managing through the self-funded plan where it's the most cost-effective way to run a health plan because you're paying the actual cost of claims with that insurance component for any outlying large claims. So it's a very efficient way to run. And knock on wood, we've had a few great years where we've been able to get that reserve in a better spot.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And then my last question is around next steps. What do next steps on a timeline look like?
Absolutely. So our very next step is obviously getting this best and final pricing and then coming back to the city, talking through each of the vendors, their pricing, selecting a vendor, and then I would assume sort of working towards contracting and getting a timeline set up with them of how quickly they could get that clinic set up, hire the staff and the clinic team that is needed for care. And so when I have done this in the past, it is a little bit of a ramp up time, right? So I would imagine would be at least 6 months. They'd need to ramp up staff, get the space ready to their, order supplies and all that stuff.
Yeah, and one thing I was just going to add is once a finalist is chosen, then they would come out, look at the facility that's currently there, and then give suggestions on build out timeframe and that. So we really lean on them as well. I think the fact that it was already if I understand correctly, a health spot offices, that would obviously speed up that process.
Yeah.
Great. So it sounds like mid next year.
I would say at the latest, yeah. I
Great.
think we could definitely mid next year. I think we could be ready.
Fantastic. This is real. I really like this idea.
Great.
Thanks.
Councilman Flores.
Yeah, how you doing? Good to see you, Danny. Since the cost of, I really like this idea. It's excellent risk management approach to minimizing our costs. Since the cost of this is going to be taken out of the reserve, does there have to be a recalculation on our base plan just for the first year in order to keep everything in balance here?
Are you asking, do we need to re-examine what the reserve should
If you're
be if we
taking,
spend it?
if you're taking money out of the reserve to run a clinic, you now have to recalculate whether or not we have enough in the reserve to keep our plan functional.
Yeah, we could do that analysis. I would say, remember, there might be some upfront cost to set it up and start, but the ongoing cost, I believe, would be offset at least, if not more than offset by care coming into the clinic and not out in the market.
Yeah, and the question about the cost, is the cost going to be on a flat fee or a flat number for an annual clinic
Yes.
operation?
Yeah.
And it's not going to be driven by the amount of patients they see,
Correct.
right?
Yes, correct. And so the key will be education and getting people engaged in utilizing that clinic because it is a flat fee. So we want the most amount of people to be utilizing that clinic.
As you know, did you have something?
No,
to
go
add?
ahead.
As you know, a lot of individuals within the city, they have a current general practitioner that they deal with.
Yeah.
Are they going to be able to utilize whoever they want? The clinic will be an option, as I understand.
Yes,
That's
that's
correct.
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 And so one of the things that other clinics we've had success in when we've implemented with other clients around the country especially is bringing a local doc from the community into the clinic. Because again, it's very attractive to some of the docs because they're not now doing paperwork and filing claims with insurance
Fighting with
carriers
Insurance
and
companies.
doing all of that, right?
Yeah.
Fighting with the carriers. They can truly practice medicine. And so I think that would be ideal. And I know that there's already been some interest shown from the local community of that possibly happening. So that would be a win-win.
Well, our self-insurance program has really been a success.
Yeah.
It's just an incredible benefit.
It's truly the
Um,
only way to bend the curve in the market and not be hostage to the double-digit increases that we're seeing every single year.
So in your case, you deal with lots of self-insured programs. Do you have data from other self-insured programs, how this clinic option has helped drive their costs down?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've worked the longest with the city of Arvada. About last summer was their 10-year anniversary of their clinic, and we have just had great results. They have, again, have been able to build a robust reserve. They've had great feedback. Care has gotten better, and their self-funded plan has very much sort of leveled out. Not that you don't have bad plan years, because everybody does once in a while, but very much leveled out as compared to the years they had prior to the clinic coming along. And Fort Collins has a clinic and Will County has a clinic. I've had the longest experience with Arvada, but they both have very successful clinics.
Will there be co-pays on just the visits and the prescription?
So that really is up to the city to decide. We always recommend for those on your HMO or PPO type plans that there isn't a copay because that will encourage usage. Now, IRS rules would require for anybody on a high deductible plan, they have to pay a market rate, but we can work with the city to still price that meets the requirements, but is still attractive to attract everybody on a high deductible health plan to still come to the
I
clinic.
think I know the answer to this next question, but the individuals in our workforce they're covered by workers' comp if they get injured. I'm assuming that those have to be separated.
Right, the only occupational health services we're talking about right now was the post-offer physical and then that drug screening. We have not proposed at this point really bringing in actual workers' comp case management.
And the last question is mental health.
That's a great question. That is something that we could consider for the future, and it is something that some of our other clients have brought on site. And so it's definitely, I think we're trying to start small, build, bring, get people engaged and then look at what other services we could offer. But we're going to start small and make sure it's a success.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Council Marsh.
So we get to pay a flat fee for operations, correct?
Correct.
Now, is the operator allowed to charge back to the insurance company to our insurance plan for services?
No, ma'am.
So they don't,
Not for anything covered by the agreement, right?
Okay.
So that's all the things we talked about, urgent and emergent care and chronic condition management and those sort of things, everything else.
care.
Primary care, that's all outlined as being in the clinic and not able to be charged to your health plan.
okay. And a clinic this size, where does it range in like across the nation? Where does it, what's the minimum size of one of these clinics who they serve,
Physical size or people they're seeing?
people they're seeing?
I would say right around the size of City of Pueblo, maybe a little smaller, but generally you need a fairly substantial population as the City of Pueblo has. So 1,500 total plan members, something along that line would be the lower end of where we see clinics succeeding.
Okay, alrighty, thank you.
Thank you.
You good? Yeah, I got a couple of questions. Everybody knows I've always been concerned about the prime real estate of some of these properties. This particular property cost us 1.3 million. And from what I remember, it was $700,000 for renovation costs. So I'm not taking that out on you, but I am concerned about it, that we've lost another opportunity for property taxes. Number one, can you explain to us that don't know a lot about the health industry, when you talk about a flat fee, explain that.
So let's contrast that with what you have in the self-funded health plan. So in the self-funded health plan, costs can go up or down every year, right? It's variable. It depends on conditions that people have, care that they need, how many times they go to the doctor, the urgent care, how many high-cost prescription they have. So every year is not flat. It's like this throughout the year, depending on how claims come in. A flat fee would mean that we would pay the clinic X dollars for the year, and all of those contracted services would be provided throughout the year with no additional charges. So it capitates that fee for all of that care.
Okay, so again, in reference to the fancy word everybody throws around, fiduciary responsibility of your counsel, can you explain to me what, and you didn't bring the cost with you tonight, you said, correct?
Correct. We don't have that cost with us today.
Okay, that's troublesome to me, but if that's the case, what is the bottom line, an estimate, or maybe you can give me an estimate on what this is going to cost us annually for the city, whether it's a whatever, any way you want to paint it, what is the bottom line cost?
We will have to follow up with that. I do not have that memorized in my head. As we said, we've been working on this a couple years. I do not have that cost memorized in my head, but we will follow up with that.
You don't have any idea at all?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. We've looked at several vendors and there's different pricing models based on what the city wants. So that's what we've gone back to them and said, because the ballpark would be a pretty wide spectrum. So we're waiting on the final, and I think it's the end of this month. We're supposed to
Yeah.
have this back, the
Yes.
end of April, and we can definitely report back before anything obviously is done or whatever the city decides.
And every employee deserves this. I'm not saying they don't, but I'm just concerned about the cost right now, and the taxpayers are on us pretty good. But, I'm just concerned again, when will you come back? Or are you going to send us information between now and the next time you present?
We
or-
can give you that pricing. We can provide that pricing by tomorrow. That's where we're at right now. But then again, by the end of the month, we'd have their best and final now that we're down to these two.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Boston.
Thank you, Chairman. How much space was the Parks and Recs gonna take in that building already? You know?
They're currently occupying the first floor, so the second floor is really where all of the medical area was in the building, so we've not touched that this far, just for the specific reason. We put all architecture stock to the building until we get some kind of direction from council, so that we're not ripping things out that could potentially be used for a medical facility.
So that second floor probably would have stayed vacant otherwise.
It just depends. It depends. They're using Parks is using the existing exam rooms. So there's been no work done to the building at all. So it just depends on how we're gonna break the office space up, depending on who eventually lands there.
I'd like to ask them real quick, what happens to the building that Parks and Recs is now? What happens to that?
That's the building, counselor, that was the annex building, that has the water damage that butts right up to the Bessemer ditch. So nobody is working in that building or has been working there for months.
So to make sure I got this. So when you go into the city park, and right is the different building. When you go a little farther in. Excuse me?
Your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. So when you go in, just want the constituency to know about this. So when you go into that major first building on the right is the Dittmer building,
Off a
correct?
good night, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And then if you go a little farther in, you have the Parks and Rec main building.
Yep.
And then there's an annex building.
All the way around past the dog park where the tennis courts
Right.
are. Yep.
So it's where they're floating golf balls. Okay, I got it. So what happens to the Parks and Rec building?
So the part, it's empty right now. And the city is potentially looking at tearing it down because that's the building that was gonna be over $3 million to rehab because of the damage from the water and the mold. So those employees haven't been in there for several months now.
Okay. So, because I was in the Parks and Rec building not too long ago, and I'm not telling you, I could find all the problems, if that's the one I'm talking about, the main one, correct?
The main one, those employees are still in there working. They're gonna stay in there and work. There'll be no changes to that area.
Okay.
That building's good.
That's what I want to clarify. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I just wanted to add to the question that Councilman Gomez indicated how much it was going to cost. The model that we're talking about right here is that we're going to save money, that there's really not going to be a cost. And when you start contrasting how much it costs for a night in the emergency room versus being able to go right into a clinic and be seen right away, that thing is going to add up quickly. And so
Agreed.
this is all part of the risk management strategy that the city elected 17 years ago. And I brag about this a lot because I think that over the years, our employees have really benefited from this self-insurance program because we're not seeing this increase every year that a city is faced with of 12%. Now your insurance, and a lot of cities, they make the employee pay for half and they'll pay the other half. But when you
Correct.
see increases like 12%, 14%, 8%, that adds up, and that's
does.
just for 1 year.
Yeah.
So this clinic really has the potential of continually driving our losses down, basically because we're controlling our costs. So even though we say this is going to cost us here, we're going to save it over here in our self-insurance program by reducing our losses, or the amount of losses that we, I guess it would be considered losses, but
Yeah.
it's another
is
way
not.
of managing this huge self-insurance program that we have.
Yeah.
So.
And we want to
when-
be clear, there is upfront cost.
Yeah, I understand.
But we
that.
believe over time, this will more than pay for
Right,
itself.
and you've got the data
Right.
to prove that.
Yeah. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's going the self-funded route, getting into that, building up a reserve. We would never have suggested a clinic year one out of the gate because we want the reserve to be built. But now that we've been doing it for a few years and the reserve is there, our actuaries believe now is the time to get a clinic in place so we can further bend that curve of medical trend and then continue to save money into the future.
Terrific. Well, thank you.
Council
you.
Maestri.
You know, obviously the success behind it too is that the employees and their families, that's where they decide to go to.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
You're
and
exactly
So
right.
have we done any kind of in-house survey? Because one thing, with our constituency in general as a whole. They're very picky about their doctors. They've been going to them for a long time. And especially those with chronic illnesses, which I noticed that was one of the doctors you'd be having that would take care of chronic illnesses and so forth. Have we done any kind of survey in-house to make sure that the employees are willing to leave where they're at now and go and attend? Receive their
I would
medical
have to
care?
turn to the team. I don't think any specific survey has been done at this time, but I know we do have a meeting set up with the union fairly soon. They understand the clinic project is in place, and so they would like this very similar update. And so we will be working with them to ensure that they support it as well, so that they can get their union members also to be supportive. or
Yeah,
help us.
the union will weigh in heavily on this, I'm sure. And if there's an increase in any kind of increase coming out of it in healthcare coverage, that's when it starts to hit the general fund.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's always a potential. So, okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
We have anybody else? I think anyone other comments? Okay, I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you for
much.
coming up.
Time.
Thank you. Okay, up next, we're gonna have the residential rehabilitation. Melissa Cook, Housing Administrator, 15-minute presentation. Hello, Ms. Cook.
Good evening, council. Thank you for having me. But just a moment while we pull up the presentation. Okay. Great. Well, tonight we are going to be talking about the 5 housing strategies. So I did pass out some documentation that you should have at your stations. And specifically, we're going to be talking about residential rehabilitation. So what you have in front of you are our 5 strategies for affordable housing. I'll quickly go through them. The first one is going to be addressing our boarded, blighted, and burnt properties that are in need of demolition because of structure failure or fires. The second is residential rehabilitation, which we're also going to be talking about tonight. The third is we are really trying to assist with the creation of new housing units through infrastructure needs. So we are actively looking at, purchasing, looking at city-owned lots, developing that infrastructure to make the ultimate cost of building housing on those lots more feasible. Additionally, we're looking at our blighted commercial properties throughout the city of Pueblo. We are looking at actively acquiring those properties, demolishing the ones that are blighted that need to be demolished, and building affordable housing on those. We have quite a few different irons in the fire, if you would, on those that we're really excited that we hope are going to come to fruition and we'll be telling you about soon. And the last one, of course, is the homeless housing options with the acquisition of the emergency shelter. So tonight, specifically, we're going to be talking about the first and second strategy, our boarded, blighted, and burnt, and the residential rehabilitation. So what we've done over the last few months is the housing department has went and done physical inspections to come up with a comprehensive inventory of all of the city's long-term vacant abandoned properties. We are not looking at properties that have been vacant for 30 days because a tenant moved out and another tenant is moving in. That's not necessarily a particular concern for us. We are looking at those long-term blighted properties. In order to do this, we started with just doing physical drive-by inspections, and I'll show you the areas that we did those drive-by inspections. We also, merged that with some data-driven techniques, looking at the 3 condemnation lists from the 3 condemning bodies throughout the city. That's the PDPHE, the City of Pueblo, and Pueblo Regional Building. And then really, we just merged all of that information, come up with this very comprehensive list. And so you can see that we did physical inspections in these neighborhoods. These are the blocks, Bessemer, the East Side, Eastwood Heights, Northside Avenue, and Hyde Park. And what that told us was actually a bit surprising to some of us. So ultimately, what we've learned is we have 229 properties that we have identified that have been vacant long-term that are good candidates for rehabilitation, and 60 properties that need demolition. So I think that when we talk about the properties around town that need to be demolished, I think that we all, myself included, likely thought that it was more than 60. So I bring this up because it's really the data that drove this effort that we're talking about tonight, that the real story here is these 229 units that can be rehabilitated, that it's really important that we intercept these before they turn into properties that are so neglected that they need demolition. And so we're trying to identify how can we best do that. So again, what is included in these properties? They're residential only. We are not looking at commercial. So there's going to be additional properties that need demolition or rehabilitation that are commercial. Again, looking at those long-term vacant properties. And we were looking at the intent of this was to identify those ones that have non-responsive owners. And so just a note is that the actual number of vacant homes within the city of Pueblo will differ from this. If you look at our housing study, it does have a different number. Again, these are just those long-term vacant properties that will not be put back into production without interference. And so what do some of these properties look like? These were just snapped as we were driving through the city. And these are some of the properties that we're talking about. They're boarded up, but they could be rehabbed. Some of them, it may take a substantial amount of funds in order to rehabilitate these properties, but they are not demolition candidates. So here's just a few photos. You can see, this property here on the right has T-lock shingles. The roof is probably 40 years old maybe, but it looks like structurally it has enough integrity to still be rehabilitated. And so what does this pilot program look like? Well, first we have to identify the properties, which we've done. The next step, we are identifying those with non-responsive owners, which we're finding is the majority of these properties that we've identified. And then we will identify which ones of these have liens on them. We're actively doing this right now. Which ones of these have liens that are city-owned liens? Most of them. So we're in the due diligence phase. We're really in this first part. We are actively working to engage with an attorney here in town that will help us foreclose on the city-owned liens. So this pilot program, what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify 10 good candidates, 10 of the 229, and go through this process over the next 6 months up to a year, as it can take a while for this process. And then ultimately, these homes will end up at an auction. And we'll talk about that auction. So there's two ways that these could end up in the city. At this point, we have no way of knowing which bucket essentially these auctions are going to end. They could end up where the city could own these properties for the lien amount and the amount for the attorney's fees, or the general public could come in and apply or purchase these homes at the auction for the amount of the liens that are being auctioned at that auction. So the idea of this is it would actually create a self-sustaining program. So let's look at the first one. If the city had ownership of this at the auction, of course, we would be the highest bidder because we gained ownership. We would be paid back for any liens in the property, our attorney's fees, and ultimately, we would hopefully end up with a profit because we would then turn around and work with a nonprofit or a for-profit developer to rehab this property. And we would use an RFP process to get the highest bidder for the city. The second way is private ownership. Somebody could come in there, outbid the city for the city liens, and the city's involvement would be done at that point. So how would we fund this? There's been a lot of questions about funding, and the funding for this is actually very minimal because the city already has these liens. They're not dollars in the bank, they're receivables on our books. So first of all, the vacant property registry, which was enacted in 2021, receives about $60,000 annually. We could tap into those for the first year. And, for this pilot program, we do think, as mentioned in a previous slide, it would cost about $2,000 to $3,000 per foreclosure in attorney's fees. And so that could be used. We could also use excess administration funds from this Community Development Block Grant Program, the CDBG program. And future funding of this would be from these revolved dollars that we've received in these liens that are being paid off. And so it's important to look at the pros and cons because there's pros and cons to both of this. Before we get into this, I want to give some history of a similar project that the city has done. So from that vacant property registry in 2021, the city would come up with liens for those who did not register their property as vacant. And there have been 2 different lien sales from those. And so those also are generally identified as homes without responsive owners that are similar to what the homes are that we're trying to target. There's a few problems with that process, and we'll go through that. So I just wanted to give that background before we go through this. So the pros to this is, first of all, we could create a self-sustaining program that if we go through 10 of these in the next 12 months, we may be able to ramp that up and get through all 229 of these homes. Again, we would intercept them prior to them being demolished via neglect. And the good thing compared to the city selling the liens is that we retain control. And this is really key to this whole thing. When we sell the liens to the private market, generally we're selling those to for-profit companies, individuals, and they can be as heavy-handed or as light-handed as they choose in this foreclosure process. And so if a responsive owner does come up, even if it is late in the process, that person who purchased the lien from the city can then go on and still continue the foreclosure process. I think this is key to the city in that we plan on doing our due diligence. We are only trying to aim this towards those homes that have no responsive owner and there is no responsive owner on the horizon. And so we can be as light-handed as we want and work with those property owners in a way to get those properties back in production in a way other than coming in and foreclosing. Obviously, there are some cons. So the first one is the public perception, which is really big about what we just talked about. We want to be careful that we're choosing these homes wisely and that we're not, foreclosing on a home that is involved in, an active mitigation effort. And so we do plan on doing our extensive due diligence on that. And then the other con is that there's a possibility that the city could own these homes for, somewhere between 4 and 6 months. We would be responsible for the upkeep, the weed removal. We would need to, rekey the property, everything that comes with property ownership for that brief period of time while we find a partner to rehab these units. We do have some funding set aside in the CDBG program for neighborhood revitalization that can be used for that, so that we wouldn't be leaning or putting undue pressure on our other housing or our other city departments. Long-term, looking at this same type of program, there's other opportunities as well. And so, there's really 4 key opportunities. We have the vacant homes. That was what we talked about today that we can rehab. We have vacant homes that need demolition. We know this. As this program progresses, it very well could produce income that could be used to help demolish these vacant homes. We could use this enforcement action to then gain ownership of the properties of the vacant lands post demolition, and work with our nonprofit partners throughout town to create affordable housing options. There's also vacant lots that are privately owned throughout the city. That are, again, owned by private owners, but we have previously demolished properties on that we can again engage with this attorney to then gain ownership of those properties. And of course, just the lots that the city owns that we can work on providing housing as well. And so that is what I have. What questions do you folks have?
I'd like
for
to
me?
have one right off the book. Still going to call you fearsome Nearson. You're good. And what I like is the way you put it in easy speak for the rest of us to catch on. But how many homes do you think we have a good shot of ownership out of that percentage of 200, or not the percentage of 229? Is there any numbers yet? I mean, that's going to be a tough task, right?
Yeah, so I don't know that I have the numbers. I can tell you that of those, they're almost all non-responsive. And of those, almost all of them don't have like senior liens, like a mortgage or anything, because the mortgage broker would have already foreclosed on the property. And so I think the bigger question is, once we get into these, we did drive-by inspections on all of these, but sometimes you just don't know what's behind those boarded up doors until you open it up. We do think that a few of those are going to flip from they could be rehabbed likely to they may need to be demolished. We are anticipating about 10% of that could be that number. So that's still a substantial amount. That's 29. So I think that's the bigger question. As far as the properties, we've already started doing the research and looking at liens and encumbrances on these properties. And the majority of them have very minimal liens and encumbrances. And of those, it's the city liens.
Well, in actuality, it might be a relief to some of these folks if they can, if they're not going to get charged with the liens or the cost of any of this, we can absorb through the foreclosure process, the home, correct? For
Correct.
renovation? Okay, so on the demolition list, how do you determine what location? And again, to be fair, which I hate doing sometimes, but to be fair, this is a holdover problem from the last regime, okay? The last mayor's office. And you guys are at least, going after it correctly now, but how many of those homes realistically in reference to demolition, if we've got, you said 60, I believe, for demo?
Yes.
Is there a cost average for that, or depends on the size of the property and all that stuff?
Oh,
Do
it
you have any idea
absolutely.
what
It
kind of money we're
absolutely
talking about?
Yeah, it absolutely depends. And I would say that it's anywhere from 40,000 to 200,000. And I think a safe and really easy for this calculation estimate or average is about 100,000. And
Wow.
so with 60 homes, that's $6 million that we need to address this problem within the city.
Okay, thank you. Council Flores.
The one thing that's missing from the presentation is the cooperation that we should have with other entities that can help us. For instance, the Posada, who could potentially help us in the demo process just because of the rules that we're governed with. And I have a close relationship with them in my past job, but they're able to demo houses for probably half of what we have to go through with all the technicalities of our bidding process, Davis-Bacon wages, a lot of that kind of stuff. So I'm looking at your presentation and it looks like, are we going to go it alone here? Are we going to get urban renewal as an example involved in it just seems like there's so many organizations like the Housing Authority, the NeighborWorks, Posada, Pueblo Urban Renewal Authority, that if we put all of our resources together, we could accomplish a lot more. But in this particular case, it looks like this is all driven just that where the city is going to take this all by themselves. Am I wrong, or could you clarify that?
Sure. Yeah, let me clarify. So this pilot program is not about those properties that need to be demolished. Ultimately, if this pilot program generates some revenue for the city, then we would essentially start a fund to address the properties that need to be demolished. This is looking at those that need to be rehabilitated. There would or could be cooperation with both public or private partners. If the city were to be the winner of at the auction and the city owned the property, then we would put out a separate RFP and say, hey, please come in. We haven't worked out exactly what this looks like, but I'm sure that we would, have additional points for nonprofits to have a more competitive RFP if they wanted to purchase this from the city and rehabilitate it into affordable housing. So yes, there absolutely are those partnerships, but as far as the demolition, that's separate from this pilot program. It's a parallel conversation that we're all having.
Let's assume you're successful in getting 10 vacant properties that you want to rehab. A substantial cost is going to be rehabilitation and mitigation, even in the houses that you want to rehab. So it's not just in the demo area, but in order to prepare a house that's been sitting out there for 20 years is going to take a considerable amount of money to demo that house and also mitigate the asbestos and all the other mold or whatever else is in the house. So I just think that we would be a lot more successful if we approach this more on either a consortium or a partnership with a lot of these entities. That we're not reinventing the wheel. A lot of these companies are doing it already because I'm aware of it, especially the Housing Authority and Posada as an example. But it's just a thought. I mean, it sounds like you're really trying to create an inventory. And then at the point that you create that legally by being able to, get those properties, whether it's a piece of land, whether it's a house, through the utilization of eminent domain, whatever you want to call it. You know, it just seems like at this stage, and maybe I'm way ahead of myself, it sounds like maybe this is just the platform for the inventory you're going to create. And then the next step is to potentially involve other people to come up with the ability. I know for a fact that we could decrease our costs on demo, whether it's an existing house that needs to be rehabbed or a complete raising of a house. We could cut our costs considerably by involving people that do this sort of thing and have been doing it for a long time. Just a thought.
Council Maestri.
When you can't reach an owner, and you're going after these houses that where you can't, that you're having no communication with the owner, how do you serve them papers to go through the foreclosure process?
Yeah, there's a legal process. It's a combination of posting and making multiple attempts to try to reach them or their emergency contacts.
At what point would you have to go through eminent domain? Because that's a more costly, obviously it's a more costly avenue to go through. Where's your breaking point there?
Yeah, so eminent domain is not the avenue that we're looking at. We would look at the foreclosure process. If there is no responsive owner, now it does take longer. That's why the timeline in the presentation was between 6 and 12 months. We think most of these will take closer to 12 months because you have to post, you know, for a considerable amount of time, trying to find and identify that owner. For several months. And so, yeah, we're not planning on mixing the two, eminent domain and foreclosure. And it's really just the same as if we were a loan servicer that's foreclosing on a loan that's not being paid. It's that same judicial process that we're looking at going through.
Yeah, because your big, you know, obstacle, your biggest challenge is mitigation. We see that in the bids that come forward to demolish a lot of these houses. I had a house, you know, in my district that was $75,000 just to demolish it, and half of it was burnt down. So what do you have left when you have that investment in it? You know, the lots aren't worth that much. Not even the lot is worth that much. And so, and then if we're doing it in, you know, what would you say, underserved neighborhoods or more economically challenged neighborhoods, is the plan to resell it as affordable housing? Because I know, I mean, the city is not going to go into renting out houses, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, let me make a clarification. The city's involvement in this would be just the legal effort to change the ownership. We would not be doing any rehabilitation. We are not doing any demolition of these properties. This is us just being the legal avenue in which to foreclose on that lien and then work with those public and private partners to come in and purchase the property from us very quickly and rehabilitate it. So these partners could get these properties for the amount of the lien. Let's say the lien is $15,000. The property may need $100,000 or $125,000 in rehabilitation, but with the natural market, it does pencil to get that property back online, even with the asbestos remediation or anything like that, when you have that large of a window that you can put
Yeah,
these
the
funds in.
asbestos mitigation could cost a minimum of $50,000. It depends on what it is and how big the house is. So you're actually kind of taking a chance in acquiring the property through the courts, because as a rehabber or flipper or a developer, you know, they also want to know what they're buying, because they don't want to buy something that they have to spend $400,000 to scrap it, because that's what it costs because of the mitigation. And a lot of those mitigation expenses are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to demolish those houses. And it's not feasible for them to buy it as a rehab if they're having to do, you know, tens of thousands of dollars in mitigation. So I just wondered how you're going to handle that when it comes to it, because otherwise, guess what? We're going to have a bunch of houses that are still boarded up and we're not rehabbing them, and nobody wants to come and rehab them because they don't know what they're going to take, you know, what they're actually taking on.
Yeah,
So,
Counselor Maestri, those are great points. And I think that's why we want to start this as a pilot. We don't want to jump right into this.
Mhm.
You know, we want to start it as a pilot, start this slow, so that we can identify if there are issues. When we are selecting these properties for the pilot program, we are selecting ones that we do think will pencil even with the mitigation. So we are doing this research up front.
mhm.
But I hear you, and that is a concern, but that is mainly why we want to start this a little bit slow. You know, maybe next year, if we're successful, then we can ramp this up and start addressing more and more homes.
Mhm. Okay.
Ms. Cook, I've got a couple things real quick, just, and you probably have thought about this already. I'm just gonna throw it out. What the heck? In reference to some of the more visual demolition places that have got to be everybody knows the clamshell. It's been a nightmare forever. And I'm always thinking about, what about the people that are sitting there at the Fuego place right across the street, eating their meal and visiting that thing. And then behind the clamshell, the new steakhouse, not new, but they're trying to get that done. So in reference to how you select those destination places, whether it be a restaurant, whether it be a museum, whatever, or I'm also concerned about some of the commercial stuff where some of those perimeter sites that are visible. And if you're coming in from off out of town and you're coming off a highway and you're visualizing that on the way in, that's not good. So I'm just wondering, how do you guys prioritize that stuff? You've probably thought about a lot of things I'm talking about. Is that the case or no?
Well, you know, for this pilot, we are trying to be equitable. So we are selecting properties from each of the districts with this pilot. And so we don't necessarily have a, you know, a full plan for what this would look like outside of the pilot, but we want to, you know, have some equity and select from each of the districts.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you. Anybody else? Councilor Boston? Councilor Martinez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that this is great. I think that it's very strategic of a way to move forward. I'm curious, Melissa, how you chose the neighborhoods or that loop that you showed. How did that come to be?
Those are just, you know, our team physically drove by every home in those neighborhoods because those are the higher risk neighborhoods that we've learned that have more instances of these, you know, burnt homes or the abandoned homes.
Okay. And then you said you wanted to move, the pilot program is going to be based on 10 good candidates. What constitutes a good candidate?
Well, we need to make sure that the financial, you know, that it pencils financially. We really don't know if there is going to be private market interest at the auctions. And so again, the city may end up owning these. We could have, I mean, let's say that we have a $10,000 lien. We could have somebody come in at the auction and bid 50,000, 60,000. I've talked to some investors that have reached out after the recent press, and there is appetite. We just don't know what that looks like. And so, you know, we're trying to find ones that we know will pencil, that the rehab costs we don't think will exceed what the sales price and the purchase price or the auction price will be.
So what I'm hearing is that a good candidate of a house would be some place that has a relatively low cost lien attached to it, isn't hung up, you know, in the court system. Is that what I'm hearing makes a good candidate?
Sure, yeah, that some of the factors, absolutely.
Okay. And then maybe you covered this, and I wasn't paying attention. What's the average lien amount?
I don't have that information yet. We're still in the information gathering phase for a lot of the liens. We've seen them over $100,000 for city liens where we've demolished properties. We've seen them for the vacant property registry, which is I think $500 plus another $700 as a penalty, so at $1,200, right around there. So
Okay,
they're all
that's a
over the
big
board. I
range.
don't have an average. I'm sure I can get that and report back.
Yeah, I'd just be curious of how much or like what the average lien is, because I think that, I mean, what I hear especially is that because of some of those high liens that you were talking about, where there's, you know, demolition, abatement, you know, all of those factors that are into a lien, that makes a huge barrier for then repurposing that into, you know, a viable lot or whatever that is. So once you have that, I'm just curious what that looks like.
Yeah, and Councilor Martinez, the other thing with that as well is if it's a city lien, the city can, you know, forgive that
Waive.
lien and put that unit back into production. So for the lot that has a $110,000 lien, it will never, the natural market will never purchase that property,
Yeah.
build on it because the land value is just not worth that. It's worth, a few $1,000s. And so there has to be city involvement in order to dig us out of some of these situations. And a lot of that requires us to forgive some of these liens.
What's the timeline?
We're actively pursuing this. We think that we may see results in as early as 6 months, but as I mentioned earlier, it's probably closer to 12 because we don't expect that there's going to be any responsive owners. That's the intent of this.
Okay.
So probably closer to 12, then we'll see some of these actually changing ownership and start to be rehabilitated.
As you're rehabilitating the stock, similar to Councilor Flores' point, I would advocate, reaching out to our friends at NeighborWorks or even Chaffa even. I'm curious if they could really help to have funds to help specifically like not only with demolishing it, but even just if it's going to be dedicated to like low income housing, I think that they could be really good partners at, once we've gone through the whole legal process and everything like that, I think that they could be really good partners at the table to turn over property.
Councilor Boston.
Thank you, Chair. Man, what a name. Boarded, blighted, burnt. I think those are three of the biggest complaints about constituents with houses and neighborhoods. So I cannot wait to see this idea come to fruition. It may not be easy. There may not be some unknowns, but if it was easy, it'd already be done. So I commend you guys for putting together this plan, and I can't wait to see how it pans out, and I really hope it has good success. And I'm sure if there's any partnerships or help we can get from other partners in the community, we will pursue those. So I'm hopeful for this.
Councilor Maestri.
How much is your budget to start launching this with?
60,000.
60,000.
Is that it? Okay, Council, anything else? Ms. Cook, thank you
Thank you.
for the presentation. And then up next, we have short-term rentals. Scott Hobson, Acting Director, Planning and Community Development, 15 minutes. And if we stay within the 15 minutes, we'll actually be on time. Thank you.
Good evening, council members. Barrett Odom, who's a principal planner with the planning department, is here to help with the presentation, and hopefully if there's any questions I'm not going to be able to answer, she can answer those questions. And I do rely a lot on the planning department staff to help with these. This evening, we're going to be talking about permitting and licensing of short-term residential rentals. So according to the Colorado Municipal League, a short-term rental, sometimes they call them STR or STRs, is defined as residential properties that are rented to a visitor for fewer than 30 days. And other municipalities, we've looked at other municipalities, sometimes the definitions slightly vary from this, but really they all pertain to residential rentals that are for less than 30 days. So what are the steps? Currently, we do not have a licensing procedure or codes that specifically define and provide for licensing of short-term rentals. What are the steps for implementing STRs within the land use and the city's lodging sections of the municipal code? First of all, Title 9, Chapter 5, and that's part of the licensing code that other hotels and motels fall under. That will need to be amended to provide a definition. You need to define what a short-term rental is as a separate type of lodging facility. And then under that definition, currently in the lodging code, it does not define what a residentially zoned property is that's used for a short-term rental and that are located in residential districts. So the lodging code is silent to short-term rentals, and short-term rentals are primarily, probably 95% of them are all in residential zone districts. That would need to be defined under the lodging code. Secondly, application requirements for lodging facilities do not incorporate the appropriate performance standards that would be required for a short-term rental. The standards for hotels, motels, and other lodging units are different than what the requirements would be for a residential home that's being used for a short-term rental. Those would have to be incorporated into the municipal code in the lodging section. So then under the land use section, Title 17, the land use code would need to be amended to define what a short-term rental is, and to define it as an allowed land use. You'd have to define which zone districts a short-term rental would be allowed. We need to establish performance standards that maintain health, safety, and welfare of neighborhoods. Currently, the land use code does not define or have any specified zone districts where a short-term rental would be able to be operated. The process to be able to get a text amendment or an ordinance to City Council, we would continue to have a work session with the Planning and Zoning Commission. We would develop a proposed code amendment, and then we would provide a formal presentation and then an ordinance that would be heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission. The commission would have a public hearing, and then they would make a recommendation to City Council on a amendment to the municipal code that could accommodate short-term rentals. Licenses for short-term rentals would be issued through the city's sales tax office. We've looked at several municipalities along the Front Range, and nearly 80% of them, the licenses are issued either through their city clerk or primarily they're through their sales tax office. They're the same office that issues the other lodging licenses within the city. And then zoning verification in compliance with the performance standards for zoning would be reviewed and approved by the Planning and Zoning Department as part of the sales tax office's review prior to the issuance of the license for short-term rentals. So as part of the process, most cities that we've looked at have what they call a self-certification checklist or property owner affidavit that would be required for each license application. The checklist addresses the performance standards in the zoning code, safety regulations that would be required, parking, any insurance requirements for the home, occupancy limits based on the number of bedrooms, the size of the house. And then there are requirements that most municipalities have for the advertising of short-term rentals. Typically, they're not allowed to advertise on any of the renting platforms like Airbnb or VRBO. They have to include their license that they have issued through the city as part of any of that advertising. There would be a maximum number of occupants that would be based on the number of bedrooms in the home. So typically it would be, if you have a 3-bedroom house, the occupancy would be somewhere around 6, or you may have one pull-out bed in the living room, so you may have a maximum of up to 8. But the regulations would set occupancy based on the number of bedrooms that are in the house. As part of the application process, we would develop an electronic application through our OpenGov portal, and it would be handled electronically like all other applications we have for the most part in the city. Applicants would have to self-certify that the information that they're providing on their application is accurate and truthful, and they're subject to penalty for perjury if they provide inaccurate or information that isn't correct. Applicants would need to be legal residents of the United States. And then the issuance of the license and applicable sales and lodging taxes, we wanted to cover a little bit on that. Each short-term rental will need to secure a sales tax license, and they would also need to secure a lodging license like any other hotel or motel in the city. They all have sales tax licenses and they have lodging licenses, and that would be issued by the city sales tax office. Secondly, The short-term license holder would be responsible for paying city sales tax, which would be 3.7%, as well as the city lodging tax, which is 4.3%. That's the same as the hotels, motels, other lodging units in the city. Currently, the city has agreements with some of the booking platforms, so Airbnb and HomeAway, which I understand is VRBO, falls under the HomeAway booking platform. We currently, through those platforms, if a person books through Airbnb and it's a unit within the city of Pueblo, we currently are collecting the city sales tax on that rental, and that's being dispersed by the rental platform company to the city. In 2024, the city collected $6,550 based on the 3.7% sales tax for those units that are being booked through the lodging platforms. If we were to have these homes licensed under the lodging license, and the 4.3% was also collected, that would have added another $7,321 in revenue for short-term rental. So how will the regulations for the short-term rentals be enforced? Under the municipal code, we have an entire section for enforcement of regulations under the lodging section of in Title IX. The same procedures that are currently in the lodging section of the code will apply to all lodging establishments, including short-term rentals. Performance standards related to the zoning code, and those would be, for example, parking requirements, requirements for trash receptacles and trash pickup. Those would fall more under the land use code of the city, and those sections will be enforced by the city's code enforcement department within the police department. Under these provisions and under the current lodging code, licenses can be revoked for violations of provisions of the municipal code. And that's usually the way most of the municipalities that we've looked at, those enforcement actions are handled through their lodging licensing code provisions and the ability for the city to revoke lodging licenses. So this is a map that was done in 2022. And basically, this shows the Airbnb, general locations of the Airbnb rentals from 2022. And there were 96 general locations that were identified. This does show the zone districts that as best we could determine. R2 was the most common zone district for short-term rental. R1, and then there was a mixture of other residential zone districts. The other column is primarily what we see as planned unit development residential zone districts. We did a similar exercise in 2018 when we first brought this to City Council, and there were about 70 units that we found from Airbnb. And at that time, almost half of those were in the R2 zone districts. The R1 is kind of picked up, although from the map, the majority of the R1 is in the Belmont neighborhood. And that was a little different from what we did in 2018. So that's a quick overview of what would need to happen if council chose to license short-term rentals and the potential for the lodging revenue that the city could secure as part of that. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as council will remember, in the council retreat in February, this was actually one of the things that I talked about in terms of potential revenue generation. As we are thinking about other ways to generate revenue for the city, weirdly enough, I was having a conversation with a colleague that was visiting, and she said that her Airbnb didn't charge city lodging tax. So I spoke with staff here, came to find out that we actually don't have the codes in place, like Mr. Hobson said, to actually take city lodging tax. So that's why I was like, you know, it could be a potential way, though it's nominal, to increase revenue for the city. Like Mr. Hobson said, plenty of other communities across Colorado already have mechanisms in place to charge lodgers tax. And what I like most about this is that it's visitors primarily who are paying the lodgers tax. So the tax isn't like a sales use tax, like Puebloans aren't going to be paying a lodger's tax. It's people visiting Pueblo. So we're not putting that burden on Puebloans. So that's why I think I want to move forward with this. I really appreciate all the hard work, Mr. Hobson and Barrett, that you put into this presentation. For the P and Z, I'm excited to hear what they say in their work session. So I'd like to potentially come to that and just be, just listen to that conversation as P and Z is talking about this. I do have a couple of questions for the licenses, because some Airbnb owners or STR owners have multiple short-term rentals. Do they only apply for one license, or is it one license per short-term rental? Does that make sense? So like if I own 5 Airbnbs, am I only applying for one license, or am I applying for one license per Airbnb?
Each Airbnb will require a license based on the address, because we'll have to have a site plan, we'll have performance standards for each, so each will be licensed individually.
And does that, for that license, does that require an annual re-up, or once you're licensed, you're good to go?
I believe we're not going to have annual inspections. I think that's the sticking point right now, because the ones that we have slightly permitted are under bed and breakfast. And I think there is an annual inspection on that, and that's causing a little bit of problems. So no, they'll self-certify. Now, if there's a problem, and that's reported to us or licensing, then we'll have code enforcement or the licensing division look into that, and they'll take corrective action.
Okay.
But no annual inspection.
Okay.
And there will be an annual permit fee, which would be the same as hotel lodging, which we're proposing to be $100 a year.
$100 per year.
Per year,
Okay. And what is that fee, Scott?
$100.
No, what is that specific fee like for?
To have a lodging license for a short-term rental.
Okay. So they would need the STR app, the STR application, and then they would also need basically to get a sales tax, which they already have, or a business license through our sales tax office, which they already have, and then a lodging license.
I don't think we actually have a license issued currently for the short-term rentals. What we do is we have an agreement with the rental platform, the Airbnb. And so as rentals are taken in by Airbnb, they collect that sales tax, but we do not have a current license that's issued. That's part of the purpose of why if we want to do this, we have to establish a licensing
Okay.
procedure.
Okay. Thank you.
Council Flores.
I wanted to go back to that slide that shows the sales tax numbers that you put together under bullet point 3. And it says, we are currently collecting sales tax from Airbnb home booking platforms. And the 2024 collected sales tax was a little bit more than $6,500. Had we had the lodging tax, it would have added another $7,321. Is that a monthly or annual number? Annual?
That's the annual number.
Yeah, I guess the $64,000 question is, why are we doing this at all? It seems like we probably are spending people's city employees' time that far exceed $15,000. But maybe this is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm assuming that once we say that we're going to be doing this, that maybe more people will come forward, because we know there's probably more people that are doing this.
There probably are more people, although the question that you're asking, Councilman Flores, was the same question that was brought up in 2018 when we reviewed this with council. And today with the revenue that's being collected, this is not necessarily a process that is going to be a big money maker today for the city, but it is a process if we want to have these establishments licensed and on the same page as a hotel motel where they're paying their fair share in taxes. That's really more of it makes it a legal authorized use. But today it's not necessarily going to be this big revenue generator.
It's more being equitable with leveling the playing field for everybody that's renting, whether it's a motel, hotel, or Airbnb.
Correct.
That makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we're right on time, folks. Mr. Hobson, thank you for your time. I think we're done. If anybody's got anything else? We're good. One thing before we adjourn, I want to direct the city attorney to draft a resolution to increase the number of public commentary speakers from 6 to 10 for 3 minutes instead of the 5 minutes to allow more citizens to voice their concerns. The president of council, of course, has the discretion to shorten or lengthen speakers' times within reason. And other than, I think we're going to be returning here at about 7:10. If anybody's got anything else, we're good.